The courtroom fell silent as she stepped through the grand oak doors. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit that absorbed the light like ink, her heels clicked against the marble floor with slow, deliberate purpose. Her presence carried weight, an invisible force that made even the most seasoned lawyers sit up straighter, their throats suddenly dry. Heads turned, whispers died, jaws tightened. She walked like someone who had nothing left to prove and everything left to say. Her eyes, sharp as shattered ice, scanned the room with chilling calm. Judges, officers, reporters, officials, and the townspeople. Her townspeople. The ones who once tossed her away like trash on the roadside, now frozen in place, unsure whether to stand or hide. They didn't recognize her, not yet, but she remembered all of them. Every voice that mocked her, every eye that looked away when she needed help, every door slammed in her face when she was cold and starving and begging for mercy. She remembered the children who laughed as she dug through garbage, the mothers who pulled their kids away from her like she carried disease, the fathers who spat on her father's name and called her a curse. They thought she was gone, a forgotten footnote, a beggar's daughter swallowed by the streets, but she had returned. Not with rags or dirt under her fingernails. She had returned with power, authority, a case so airtight it made the guilty sweat before a word was spoken. But what frightened them most wasn't the evidence in her hand. It was the expression on her face. Not angry, not cruel, just calm, too calm, like a storm that had already passed and left nothing standing in its wake. The judge cleared his throat, suddenly aware of his own trembling hands. He glanced at her case file, saw her name, and flinched. Mira, the beggar's daughter. Now a name spoken like a warning. And as she approached the stand, eyes locked on the same people who had once laughed as she cried in the mud, only one question filled the air. What did she come here to do? And why does it feel like everyone's fate is about to change? But years ago, long before the courtroom, the silence, the fear, she was just a barefoot girl, sitting in the cold mud, clutching her father's cracked, weathered hand. The rain that day had no pity. It soaked through her torn dress, dripped down her tangled hair, and pulled around their feet like the world itself was washing them away. Mira didn't cry, not because she wasn't hurting. She had simply run out of tears long ago. Behind her, the town buzzed with life, shopkeepers shouting prices, carriages rattling over cobblestone, well-dressed children laughing as they pointed fingers at her. She was used to it by now, the laughter, the sneers, the looks that slid over her like she wasn't even human. A stain, an eyesore, the beggar's daughter. Her father, Armin, once built fine things with his hands. Doors carved with care, jewelry boxes lined with velvet, tables that families gathered around for generations. He was respected, until one day the scaffolding gave way. His spine shattered, his tools fell silent, and the world turned its back. Now he sat slumped against a brick wall, legs useless, pride broken, and hand outstretched for coins that never came. People passed him like they passed rotting fruit. Mira sat beside him every day, unmoving, unwavering. She didn't understand the politics of poverty, but she knew injustice when it kicked dirt in her face. She was small then, 7, maybe 8, but her eyes were older, far older than they had any right to be. She watched the other children from a distance, bright, polished, loud. They mocked her, of course, called her names, threw things. Once, a boy spit on her book of drawings and said beggars didn't get to dream. She didn't retaliate. She just kept drawing, because inside Mira's head lived a different world, one where she wasn't invisible, one where she stood tall, where her words carried weight, where she could lift her father up and silence every voice that tried to bury them. Late at night, when the market was empty and the town finally stopped pretending it had a heart, she'd curl into her father's side and whisper, "Baba, will it always be like this?" And his answer never changed. "No, my little storm. Even a grain of sand can blind a king." She didn't fully understand what he meant at the time, but she memorized it, etched it into her bones like a promise, because it was all she had. Mira was bright, too bright, some said. Sharp eyes, sharper mind. She could solve puzzles faster than most adults. She once corrected a merchant's math without flinching and was slapped for it. "Don't act like you're better than us," the man had hissed. "You're still nothing." But Mira didn't want to be better than them. She just wanted to be seen, respected, safe, free. She wanted a life where her father's hands weren't shaken by cold, where his eyes didn't carry shame. She wanted to be someone people couldn't ignore. But in a town built on hierarchy and appearances, where the rich wrote the rules and the poor lived in the cracks, Mira's dreams felt like treason. And still, she dreamed, because deep down, she believed her father's words. One day, she would stop being the dust under their boots. One day, she would be the sand in their eyes. The world never let her forget who she was. Not a girl, not a dreamer, just trash. It didn't matter how quietly she walked, how small she made herself, how often she looked away to avoid catching someone's eye. Mira had learned the rules of survival. Stay invisible, stay silent. But the world still found her. It started with the children. Laughter sharper than knives, stones thrown like they were playing a game. "You stink like the streets. Go beg somewhere else, beggar rat." One boy spat directly in her food, once, what little she'd found, then ran laughing to his friends. But it wasn't just children. The merchants were worse. Every morning Mira would wander the market pretending to browse, not to steal, just to look, to feel human. But the moment she stepped too close, "Get away from my stall, filth!" they'd shout before even checking their coin bags. One slapped her wrist when she touched a piece of fruit. Another threatened to have the dogs set on her. People cheered when she tripped in the mud. Grown men laughed as she wiped blood from her knees. And at the center of it all was Talia, golden-haired, silk-draped, the judge's daughter. She was everything Mira wasn't. Adored, admired, above consequence. And she knew it. Talia didn't just insult Mira. She choreographed her humiliation. Once, she invited the other children to a mock charity day, where they dressed up in rags and threw fake coins at Mira. They laughed as she sat frozen, too stunned to move. Talia stood over her, smiling. "I'm doing you a favor," she said sweetly. "At least someone's looking at you for once." Mira went home that night with her dignity in pieces. And home was barely a place anymore. Her father was coughing now. Deep, rattling coughs that didn't stop. His face, once strong despite the pain, looked thinner, paler. His eyes were tired in a way that terrified her. When the landlord came, he didn't even knock. He just threw their bundle of belongings into the alley. No rent, no roof. This isn't a charity ward. They had nowhere to go, so they slept behind the butcher's shop, where the meat scraps reeked and rats crawled freely. Mira curled up beside her father, who tried to hide his coughing so she wouldn't worry. But she knew, and it broke something in her. One morning, she watched him try to stand with trembling arms, to stretch his hand out again to the passing crowd. She saw the way he lowered his eyes, not in humility, but in shame. It was the first time she'd ever seen him look small. Not because of his legs, but because his hope was dying. And that was the moment Mira felt something in herself begin to collapse. She didn't speak for days, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. Her throat locked. Her heart was too swollen with grief. She watched the world pass, numb and hollow. People stepped over her as if she were part of the pavement. For a while, she believed it. That she was less. That she would always be less. A ghost. A beggar's shadow. A burden on a man who once built dreams with his hands. She began to forget the world inside her head. The drawings, the hopes, the sound of her own laugh. She stopped looking up, because looking up only reminded her how far away the light was. One stormy night, with thunder cracking like bones overhead and the streets slick with gutter water, Mira was scavenging behind the bookstore, half hungry, half trying to stay dry, when her fingers brushed against something odd. It wasn't food. It wasn't cloth. It was a book, torn, water-damaged, heavy with pages swollen from rain. Someone had thrown it out like useless junk, its spine cracked and the cover barely legible. But Mira held it like treasure. It was the first thing in weeks that hadn't made her feel invisible. The pages were filled with strange symbols, lines and lines of inked words she couldn't read, but scattered throughout were diagrams, courtrooms, figures pointing, scales of justice. She didn't know what it meant yet, but something about it called to her. It felt important, powerful, like someone had dropped a secret into her lap by mistake. She carried it back to the butcher's alley, clutching it like a flame in a storm. That night, as her father coughed beside her under a tarp of stitched-together plastic and fabric, Mira opened the book and traced the letters with her finger. Slowly, obsessively. She began to teach herself. Each day, she compared signs on the market stalls to the strange markings in the book. She matched the pictures in newspapers to the headlines. She whispered words to herself under her breath again and again until they made sense, until they belonged to her. At first, it was slow, painfully slow, but Mira had time, and she had fury, the kind that fuels focus like nothing else. Weeks passed. Then one evening, as she sat cross-legged under a flickering street lamp, mouthing through a paragraph she almost understood, a voice startled her from the shadows. "You're reading law." Mira snapped the book shut and turned, heart pounding. An old woman stood there, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, eyes sharp and knowing. "I've been watching you," the woman said. "You're clever and stubborn." Her name was Miss Leora, a retired schoolteacher who once taught the town's elite before they pushed her out for teaching poor children without permission. She had no love for the powerful, and something about Mira, her silence, her fire, made her remember why she ever wanted to teach at all. From that night on, Leora became her quiet mentor. Under the veil of darkness, by candlelight in alleys and abandoned corners, they pored over the law book together. Leora didn't just teach her letters. She taught her how systems worked, why rules were written the way they were, how people in power used them as shields and swords. "You want to change the world?" Leora asked one night. Mira looked up. "I want to survive it." Leora shook her head. "You'll never be left alone, Mira. Not someone like you. You're too smart, too awake. Knowledge makes you dangerous. Be ready for enemies." Mira didn't fully understand then, but she remembered every word. For the first time in her life, she began to feel the faintest whisper of something unfamiliar. Hope. Not for revenge. Not yet. But for change. She imagined herself as someone people listened to. Someone who could speak in the same tongue that the rich used to silence the poor. Her father noticed, too. "You speak differently now," he said with a smile, like someone who sees things others don't. But hope is fragile, and this town, it never allowed fragile things to bloom. One afternoon, Mira returned to her hidden corner where she kept her books wrapped in old cloth beneath a broken cart, only to find them scattered, pages torn, ink smeared, some burned. Talia stood nearby, arms crossed, smiling like a cat that had crushed a bird. "Thought you could read your way into our world?" she said loud enough for the market crowd to hear. "You're still a rat, Mira. Just one who learned to squeak in sentences." People laughed. Mira stood frozen, arms trembling as she gathered the shredded remains of her books. Her voice caught in her throat, not from shame, but from fury. So sharp, so cold it made her vision blur. She didn't cry. Not this time. Because as Talia walked away, Mira didn't see a queen. She saw a crack. And cracks, Mira had learned, were how light got in. The day her father died, something inside Mira broke, and something else was born. It was early morning when she felt it. That stillness. A silence so unnatural it made her stomach twist before she even turned to look. Her father lay curled beside her, just as he had the night before. But his chest wasn't rising. His face, once furrowed with pain, now held a strange kind of peace that made her want to scream. His hand was cold in hers, cold like stone, cold like goodbye. She shook him once, twice, whispered his name, her voice hoarse and cracking, but he was gone, without medicine, without kindness, without a bed or a priest or a name written down anywhere. Just gone. She sat there for hours, her back pressed to the brick wall, his lifeless hand resting in hers as the city went on around them. People passed. Some glanced. Most didn't. One man even stepped over her father's legs like he was a broken chair left in the alley. Mira didn't cry. She couldn't. She didn't feel like she was inside her own body anymore. When the sun began to fall and she finally tried to ask for help, for a proper burial, she went to the courthouse with the little she had, her father's coin tin, a torn work permit from years ago, and a photograph he'd kept folded in his pocket. But the clerk barely looked up. Not a citizen, no documentation. Squatters don't get burial rights. She tried again. She pleaded, begged, told them his name, his real name, the one they used to know when he was a craftsman, before the accident, before poverty erased him. Then he walked in. Judge Reynolds, Talia's father. He looked at Mira like she was an insect on his floor. "You're the beggar girl," he said. "You're lucky we don't charge you for loitering." "I just want to bury him," she whispered. "Number you want to pretend, you matter. But you don't." The guard dragged her out before she could speak again. That night, Mira sat beside her father's body until it was taken away by the sanitation cart. No grave, no prayer, no name, just swept off the street like garbage. She followed the cart to the edge of the city, heart hollow and pounding. When they dumped him into the trench with others, no markers, just dirt. Something inside her shattered, and from the cracks, something cold, something sharp began to grow. She picked up a handful of earth, let it crumble through her fingers. "I'll make them remember him," she whispered, "and they will fear me." That night, she returned to their alley one last time. She gathered what little they had, a blanket, her ruined books, the drawings she'd once made of a different life, and she burned them. Watched the flames curl around each page like hungry mouths. Watched her past turn to ash. Then she walked, not toward help, not toward pity, but toward transformation. She left the slums, slipped away like a shadow. No one saw her go. No one called after her. And by morning, it was as if she had never existed at all. And for years, no one spoke of Mira again, as if forgetting her would erase the shame of what they'd done. But forgetting her was the last mistake they would ever make. There were nights she wanted to scream, nights where her fists clenched so tightly her nails broke skin. But Mira stitched her pain into silence every single time. The city didn't change. It never does for people like her. But Mira had changed. She reemerged not as a ghost of the slums, but as a shadow among the high towers, unseen, quiet, watching. She scrubbed floors in a towering law firm where the ceilings sparkled like cathedrals, and no one bothered to learn the names of the cleaning staff. She emptied bins in boardrooms where verdicts were decided over wine. She swept under desks where powerful men whispered about clients like chess pieces, not people. But Mira listened. Every conversation, every case, every legal phrase they threw around like spells. She collected their words like weapons. At night, she read law textbooks left behind in conference rooms. She took the long way home just to stare at legal notices pinned to courthouse doors. Her life became study, work, hunger, study again. But no matter how hard she worked, she remained invisible. She saved every coin, and with trembling hope, she applied to a university, a second-tier school, nothing grand, but a place where she thought maybe, just maybe, they'd see her mind and not her past. The admissions counselor glanced at her documents, then smirked. "We don't enroll charity cases," he said. "You'd embarrass the program." That night, Mira sat in the park with her application still clenched in her fist. It began to rain, and she didn't move, didn't even blink. She thought of her father's cracked hands, of the way Talia had laughed as she burned her books, of how hard she had run, only to arrive at the same locked door. She was nobody to them, still, and that thought, that truth, it undid her. For the first time in years, Mira went to the edge of the cemetery, the one where the unnamed were buried in unmarked trenches. She found the mound where they dumped her father. She hadn't been back since the day they threw dirt over him like trash. She dropped to her knees, her face wet with rain and grief. "I tried, Baba," she whispered, voice cracking. "I swear I tried. But they still see a beggar, not a person, not your daughter, just dirt." Her sobs were silent, the kind that come from a place so deep, so raw, that sound becomes too small to carry the weight. She stayed there until the sky darkened, until even the wind gave up whispering. And when she finally turned to leave, she caught sight of a folded envelope tucked behind a cracked piece of wood, a place where she sometimes left wildflowers for him. It was yellowed with time. Her name, Mira, was written on the front in familiar, delicate script. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter from Miss Leora. It was dated months before her disappearance. "If you're reading this, it means you haven't given up completely. I saw the fire in you long ago, child. I knew the world would try to put it out, but you were meant to burn brighter than any of them. So I took a chance. I submitted a scholarship application in your name, an international program. They don't know your past, only your test scores. There's a seat waiting for you. Not a favor, not pity, just a chance. Take it, and do what they never thought you could." Mira stared at the second paper enclosed. A letter of conditional acceptance from a university abroad. A full scholarship. A start. Her hands covered her mouth. Her body shook. Not with sadness this time, but with something else. Something stronger. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even hope. It was resolve. Mira stood up, her soaked clothes clinging to her like a second skin. She looked one last time at the grave. "Thank you," she whispered, "for never stopping believing in me, even when I did." She pressed the letter to her chest. The storm around her seemed to quiet. The world still saw a beggar, but soon they would see something else entirely. If they wouldn't give her a seat at their table, she'd build her own court. Mira left behind the name they'd scorned. When she boarded the plane to a foreign country with nothing but her mentor's letter and a fire stitched into her bones, she became someone else, not to hide, but to become untouchable. She adopted a new surname, Varaya, meaning truth-bringer, in an old language her father once told her stories in, Mira Varaya. No one there knew the barefoot girl from the slums. No one mocked her accent, or her clothes, or the scars on her hands. They only saw brilliance. She devoured every lesson like a starving wolf. Where others memorized, she understood. Where others debated, she listened. And when she finally spoke, her words landed like thunder. By the end of her first year, professors whispered about her in staff rooms. By the second, law firms sent her offers. By graduation, she was top of her class, but Mira declined every offer. She returned, quietly, carefully, not to the slums, not yet. She moved to a nearby city under her new name, built a small legal practice in a corner office above a bakery. No fancy signs, no gala openings, just a steel plaque with her name and a desk. And one rule: she only defended those the world forgot. She won her first case against a corporate landlord trying to evict elderly tenants. Then another, representing women wrongly accused of theft. Then another, and another. The city began to talk. Mira Varela, the fierce and mysterious young attorney who never smiled, but never lost. But she wasn't doing it for fame or even justice. She was studying, watching how corruption moved, how it whispered, how it wore suits and smiled in photographs. And eventually, all roads led back to them. The town that buried her father in a trench. The man who denied him a name, Judge Reynolds. And his daughter, Talia, now a rising political figure, using charity work and social campaigns to build a shining image atop the bones of their past cruelty. Mira couldn't just attack them outright. Their power was too deeply woven into the town's fabric. But they had a weakness: greed. Mira started slow. She took on small cases from her hometown, ones no other lawyers cared about. Families losing land, shopkeepers fined unfairly, permits mysteriously revoked. She noticed patterns. All the victims had land or property close to upcoming development zone. All the complaints were quietly signed off by Judge Reynolds, and all of them led back to one trust fund company, one name hidden in paperwork and shell corporations. Talia, the same girl who once kicked Mira's books into the fire, now smiling on magazine covers as a voice for the voiceless. The irony nearly made her laugh, but there was no time for laughter, only action. Mira spent the next year building her case, quietly, ruthlessly. She used every legal tool at her disposal: FOIA requests, financial audits, digital forensics. She worked with investigative journalists and ethical hackers. She dug deep into dusty records no one thought anyone would ever look through. And what she found was enough to burn a city down: land theft, forged signatures, false charges against innocent tenants, secret bribes, a judge manipulating the law like a god. And beneath it all, the grinning face of a woman who once spat in Mira's direction. She put together a case the size of a library, every document watermarked, every witness protected. And then she filed it: civil RICO, racketeering, land fraud, conspiracy, judicial corruption. Filed not in the local courts, where she knew the strings were pulled, but in the Capitol, where the eyes of the nation could see. The date was set. The judge who once threw her out of the courthouse would now stand in one, on trial. When the media caught wind, the town reeled. But the biggest shock came on the day of the hearing, because that's when Mira stepped into the courtroom. Face unveiled, name announced, voice calm. No longer just Mira Varela, but Mira Varela, daughter of the Beggar, prosecuting counsel. And in that moment, every mocking laugh, every stone thrown, every word that had once tried to bury her, turned to dust in the mouths of the guilty. "State your name for the record," the presiding judge asked, flipping through the thick file of documents with a furrowed brow. Mira rose slowly from her seat, calm, composed, a storm behind the eyes. The entire courtroom leaned forward, as if gravity itself pulled them toward her. She looked directly at Judge Reynolds, The same man who once stepped over her father's body like it was a broken branch in the road. The same man who denied her a burial permit and called her father a squatter. Her voice didn't tremble. It cut. Mira, a pause. Daughter of the beggar you left in the street. The room froze. A cold silence spread like smoke. People turned, whispering. Some blinked in disbelief. Others simply stared at her, at the polished woman in the sharp black suit, whose voice carried centuries of pain and the power of 1,000 verdicts. Renaud's hands twitched. His lips parted, as if he wanted to deny it, to mock her, to say something, anything, to take back control. But Mira continued. With a surgical precision, she unveiled the rot, one document at a time. First came the forged land deeds, 10 families whose properties were stolen under the guise of urban development. Each signature, each stamp, traced back to the judge's office. Then came the bribery records, payments routed through fake nonprofits to Renaud's personal accounts, disguised as consulting fees, followed by testimonies, former clerks, assistants, and even a bribed officer who'd finally come forward, their conscience no longer able to carry the weight. Every piece, watertight, every witness protected, every detail verifiable. And finally, the charity, Talia's crown jewel. Hearts united, the philanthropic empire she paraded around for interviews, donations, and applause. Except Mira had the financials, the doctored records, the diverted funds, the fake projects. She laid them bare, like a surgeon exposing rot beneath gilded skin. Talia sat across the room, face drained of all color. Her lips trembled, mascara smudged under her eyes. For the first time in her life, she couldn't find a mirror or a camera lens to hide behind. Mira walked slowly to the center of the room, eyes locked on Talia. "You taught me to be merciless," she said softly, "but I just learned it better than you." Talia flinched, like she'd been slapped. The audience behind them, press, townspeople, students of law, didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They sat still, stunned, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Even the presiding judge remained frozen, his gavel untouched, his face pale. And then Mira turned. She didn't bow. She didn't raise her voice. She simply gathered her documents, placed them neatly in her leather bag, and walked toward the exit. The heels of her shoes echoed through the chamber, each step a quiet drumbeat of victory earned, not handed. As she reached the doors, someone whispered behind her. One of the townspeople, an older man who once threw trash at her father's feet, now stared at her as if seeing a ghost. She really was the beggar's girl? A young lawyer near the back stood slowly and answered, "No. She's the one who buried the kings who mocked him." Mira paused at the door. Just for a moment. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. But her eyes closed and opened again with the weight of release. She didn't need their applause. She didn't need forgiveness. She had justice. And at last, she had peace. She never looked back at that courtroom, not once, because by then, there was nothing left in that town to return to, not for her. The streets that had once jeered at a barefoot girl dragging her sick father across the mud now whispered her name with reverence. The alleyways where merchants once kicked her aside were now paved and clean, rebuilt with the funds seized from corrupt hands, not in her name, but in her father's. The Zion Foundation, a modest, red brick building that rose from the ashes of that butcher's alley where she once slept. Etched into its stone entrance, even a grain of sand can blind a king. Mira had chosen those words herself, the last words her father had ever spoken to her before his body gave out beneath the sky. The community center provided legal aid, food, and shelter for the poor, things she once prayed for and never received. It had a library filled with free books, including one worn, water-stained legal textbook framed under glass. The very first one she ever found in the trash. The one that started everything. Mira never moved back. She didn't need to. Her presence was in the walls, in the warm meals served at dusk, in the pens and papers offered to little girls whose eyes burned with the same fire hers once held. In another city, far away, Mira lived quietly. She had no grand estate, no marble statues or lavish cars. But every now and then, when the courtroom lights dimmed and her heels stopped echoing in the halls of justice, she would light a candle near her window and whisper, "We did it, Baba." One rainy afternoon, a small girl knocked on her office door. No appointment, just a shy gaze and a head too small for her oversized coat. She stood silent at first, eyes scanning the bookshelves, the certificates, the plaques. Then she asked timidly, "Miss Mira, can I be like you one day?" Mira knelt down, brushing wet strands of hair from the girl's forehead. "No," she whispered, her voice soft but sure. "You'll be better." The girl smiled, but Mira saw something deeper than joy, hope, the kind Mira once thought impossible. She stood, walking the child out, pausing only to glance at a photo hanging on her wall, a grainy black and white image of her father, younger, before the accident, smiling beside a wooden bench he'd carved with his bare hands. Beneath it, a single line, "He gave everything, so I could take back everything." That town may never erase its cruelty. The people who mocked, who hurt, who stood silent in her suffering, they would live with their shame. But Mira had rewritten the ending. She had taken the ashes of a life discarded and built a legacy that would burn brighter than their hate ever could. She wasn't just the beggar's daughter anymore. She was the voice he never had, the justice he was denied, and the proof that the forgotten can rise, not in vengeance, but in purpose. Sometimes the ones you mock today are the very ones who'll write your judgment tomorrow. Mira's story isn't just about revenge or justice. It's about hope, resilience, and the quiet strength that lives inside all of us, even when the world tries to bury it beneath cruelty and doubt. If her journey touched your heart, stirred something deep inside, or reminded you of your own battles, we want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated, overlooked, told you wouldn't amount to anything? What did you do about it? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. Your story could inspire someone else who feels forgotten. And if you found power in Mira's tale, please like this video, subscribe for more stories that ignite the soul, and share this with someone who needs to know they are not alone. Because the world may mock the weak, but fate remembers everything. And sometimes, just sometimes, it turns the tables in ways we never see coming. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and keep fighting your own story.